In this video, I'd like to introduce a hierarchy and transform systems. These systems could be used separately, but in a lot of cases they will work in tandem to automate several common tasks you might do in games. Hierarchy system is responsible for keeping parent-child relationships between entities and to notify children of a change in their relationships. This system sends three types of events. Child added is fired to the child entity when it is added to a parent. Child updated is fired to the child entity when its parent has changed. And finally, a child removed is fired to the child entity when it has lost its parent relationship. Deleting a parent entity will also delete all children and other descendants. To establish a parent-child relationship between entities, you have to call the addHierarchy method on the hierarchy system, passing both parent and child entities as parameters. To remove such relationship, you need to call the removeHierarchy method with the child entity as a parameter. These two methods are the backbone of the system as they modify the relationships themselves. The remaining methods of the API provide information about the hierarchy, as well as useful utilities for locating entities meeting specific criteria. Other than the expected getChildren and getParent methods, following three methods are implemented. First one, findFirstAncestor with component method, searches the hierarchy above the provided entity for an entity that has the specified component. Second one, findInHierarchy entity with component method, has a similar search but starts with the entity provided. Finally, findDescendants with component method searches for all entities that are descendants of the provided entity that have the specified component. One of the uses of the hierarchy system is transform system. This system manages the transforms of entities. These are represented with matrix 4 objects that provide access to translation, rotation, and scale for entities. Each entity with a transform component has both global and local transforms. Local transform is the transform of the entity in relation to either the world or to its parent entity, if it has one. Global transform is the resolved transform of the entity in relation to the world. While an entity has to have a transform component in order to be able to modify its transform, you should never directly access or modify the values of these matrices. To set a transform of an entity, you should call one of the two methods. Either setTransform, which sets the local transform of the entity, or setEffectiveTransform, which sets the local transform to the value that is required in order for the entity to have a resolved transform P of the past value. Each entity that has its resolved transform changed during this operation will be notified via transformUpdated event. To retrieve a resolved transform of an entity, you should call getResolvedTransform method. This method will return a matrix 4 that defines the transformation of the entity in relation to the world. Note that if an entity does not have transform component, this method will return a resolved transform of its first ancestor that has this component. If this entity has no ancestors with this component or does not have a parent defined, this method will return an identity matrix. Here is an example of use of these two systems. There are two entities rendered here. Each entity has a sprite associated with it. You can use the top slider to rotate the parent entity with the rock texture sprite. You can use the bottom slider to move the child entity with the plant texture sprite along the x-axis. While these entities are not connected with the parent-child relationship, the sprites are positioned independently of each other. But after the relationship is established, the child entity inherits the rotation from the parent. And even though only the translation of the child is being updated, it keeps the rotation set on the parent. When we disconnect the child from the parent, the child transformation is no longer influenced by the parent. This library is available for download and use at my GitHub page. The link is also available in the description of this video. If you find this information useful, please consider subscribing to this YouTube channel. Or you can watch some of the other videos on this channel.